Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the Growth Workshop podcast with me, Matt Best, and Jonny Adams.
Hello.
Hello.
And it's great to be joined by Chris Hatfield today from Sales Psyche. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And we're really looking forward to getting into the conversation around the psychology of sales success, and specifically, obviously, focused on sales psychology and mindset. So, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, perfect. Well, I'd love to understand a little bit about your journey so far. So maybe you could tell us a bit about where it all started for you and how you've got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I think like a lot of people when they start their business, it can come from, I always say, turn my pain into a passion almost. So I probably came out of university when I first realized I struggled a lot with anxiety, and this was 15, 16 years ago. So back then there wasn't as much of an awareness or understanding or even a label around it. And I'd gone to uni and done sports coaching. I'd always had a fascination with development and an interest with sport. And I came out and, like most people did back then, fell into sales, door-to-door sales in particular. Go and knock 100 doors a day, get into 8, close 4, selling loft and cavity wall insulation, 100% commission, go and do your thing. So most people would say that's probably anxiety inducing for anyone.
Yeah.
But at the time I kind of thought, do you know what, I don't want this to define me. I thought if I don't do this, then will it stop me? Will it get into the mindset of, oh, actually I can avoid this because of this? So I thought, well, let's go and apply some of the tools and the understandings I've got from my degree, and for once use your degree, which most people don't from uni, and started to realize that actually I was changing the way I was looking at my anxiety, changing the way I was responding to my emotions, to my perspective, to my self-talk. And with having that kind of coaching mindset, I always wanted to support other people. That's where I got my fulfillment. So it was never much of a lone wolf when it came to sales. So as I went through my career, I was giving people advice and suggestions and tools and realizing actually this was making a big difference, and thought, okay, eventually I want to do something bigger with this. So I started a podcast years ago now, and then started thinking, right, how can I break away from sales more into coaching, and went and did a coaching degree, and with the idea of being in sales, I saw particularly mindset and well-being was a very reactive thing. Like, wait for a problem, wait for someone not to be motivated, wait for someone to be burnt out, and then we'll do something about it. Or someone's thinking of leaving, oh, what can we do? And it's like, well, why aren't we doing more preventative and proactive work in the same way you would with a product or skills training? So I just felt like this was a big gap, and started going in and delivering talks and workshops around it, and then felt, do you know what, actually this is something that I can turn into a business. So about 4 and a bit years ago, during the pandemic, I thought, do you know what, let me go and start something. You know, I've always been, not always, but in the last few years, always asked myself the question, what's the impact of not doing this? I think it's very easy to think when you're thinking about something of all the things that could go wrong. But as we'll probably come to later on, the idea of almost making where you are now uncomfortable or unfamiliar can actually provoke action as well. And I thought, I'll probably resent myself, I'll resent my job eventually. And when am I going to have a better time to speak about mental health than the pandemic? Because unfortunately, obviously, it's not a good thing that the pandemic happened, but it did bring the conversation of mental health to the forefront where it belongs. So did that, started Sales Psyche, and have been doing that ever since, so delivering workshops, talks with the aims of equipping managers and salespeople with the tools to build a healthy and high performing mind along the way, and recognizing that well-being isn't just about making yourself feel better, it can elevate your performance as well.
Wow. Yeah, and I think it's such an important topic. It's a topic that Jonny and I talk to a lot of our clients on, not to the necessarily always to the same level of detail of that, but really having that focus and that laser focus on mindset. And then, yeah, I would probably agree. Door-to-door sales doesn't sound like something that's low anxiety, right? As in, most of our audience are thinking, "Hang on, is this guy really?" But thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your story. Now, I know a lot of what you do in this space is going to be coming together in a book called Sales Psyche. Is that right?
Yeah. So Sales Psyche, a guide to mastering a healthy and high performing mind, is the idea behind it. So I've packed it with 35 of my activities and tools that I coach and train, with 25 leaders from the industry as well, stories from people I've coached, with the idea of giving people the tools to build that productive, proactive mindset that will ensure that you're not only successful but not at the cost of your well-being. Really excited about, and just giving people and this sort of platform. I think this is bigger than me, this topic, but I want to be able to contribute in some way to go, we've evolved so much in the world of sales, it's about time we evolved in this part as well.
I love a bit of DIY literature, as you know those things. How many frameworks?
There's about 35 tools, so every chapter has a tool.
Yeah. It sounds like a year's worth of reading. I only get through one book a year, so that's the perfect one for me.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking when I was doing it, I go, what books do salespeople go to about mindset and well-being? They go to books not written for salespeople.
Interesting.
Carol Dweck Mindset, great book, but it's not directly written for salespeople. It's like going, what cookbook do you use to cook Italian? Well, there's nothing Italian, so I go to a French cookbook. Okay, surely someone should write something that's actually for people, so they don't have to do the hard work. Hard work.
Yeah, that's great, and I think those sorts of bits of literature and those sorts of books always have certainly for me, have a more profound effect on how it absorbs into my own sort of subconscious. And I mean, just taking, I guess, a bit of a pause there before we get into the heart of today's conversation, which is really kind of diving deeper into the psychology of sales success. As is customary on the Growth Workshop podcast, Chris, we like to ask what's been interesting in your world across the last week. So tell us what's going on in your world at the minute that's kind of fascinating that you could share with our audience.
Yeah, I think, a number of things, but one that stands out, started a free London Run Club community called Run Your Mind that embodies pretty much what I was just talking about there, giving people a space to come to talk, to run at the same time, and talking and running or walking has a profound impact on reducing our stress, social judgment, anxiety, and helping us feel more present in the moment. But this Run Club is giving people a space once a week. We have a different topic each week and questions around that topic that people pick at random, and then we'll ask each other on a run around Hyde Park. And we've covered topics like comparison with others, happiness, habits, and it's allowed people to give them that space where a lot of us want to talk about these things, but A, we think, am I going to be a burden? B, how do I bring this up? How do I bring it up my friends? Hey, do you compare yourself with other people? Like, how do I approach that? Whereas this kind of provides that space to go, this is where we do talk about those things that maybe you can feel more comfortable to then go and have a conversation with your partner, with your friend, with your colleague afterwards. Take that question with you and go, hey, I got this question at a run club today. Like, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm going to have to ask, guys. I know we're not a run club and we'd love to join. Every Thursday, is it?
Every Thursday morning.
Whereabouts?
Near Hyde Park.
Yeah.
We meet at a coffee shop, 7:25 a.m. Fantastic. And hopefully be having an evening slot soon as well.
Oh, well, we've been on your LinkedIn profile, Chris. You're a very present person on LinkedIn, and we saw a great post recently that had a few of your questions. Although we're not running, could we ask one of those questions and see what our responses are? Would that be all right? Yeah. So we picked one. It was about habits, and at SBR we are all about habits. We talk about forming habits and how habits are an important part for sales professionals and growth professionals to be successful. But this question, and Matt, brace yourself. What is one habit you wish more people could learn and benefit from? So who should we go to first? I think.
Not to me.
That goes to you then, Chris, but pass it straight over. So the question is, what is one habit you wish more people could learn and benefit from?
Yeah, and I'll add just a bit of context here, because I think one thing that I learned years ago that's always helped me when I'm breaking bad habits and building healthy habits is you don't crave the habit itself, you crave the state it delivers. So anything you look at as a habit of yours at the moment, you crave the state it delivers. Even exercise, you crave the state it delivers. If you're eating chocolate, you crave the state it delivers. And once you work out what state you're looking for, you can then recognize, actually, I'm not sort of bound by this unhealthy habit, but it's actually something that I can replace it with. But one habit I think I wish more people could learn, and I talk about it a lot, is something I started about 4 or 5 years ago, which was leaving my phone out of the bedroom. So going to bed in the evenings, I used to scroll if I couldn't sleep. If I woke up, I'd maybe just grab it and then I'd wake myself up. And in the morning, it was the first thing I grabbed. And I always felt sort of chained to that because you then see all the notifications. And then I thought, okay, this is something I want to start doing. So I started sort of 2 or 3 days a week, then 4 days, and then started recognizing and reflecting, how do I feel, giving myself something to do. And now it's allowed me just to go, right, the bedroom is for sleeping. I don't scroll in the evening. I can switch off a lot quicker. I also feel like I'm sleeping more consistently.
Yeah.
And then in the morning, I always then go, right, what can I do for myself before I think about what others want from me? And that has been a habit that's just like revolutionized. And it's an example of habits that they can be the smallest of things that can make the biggest of differences as well.
Yeah, I love that. And without poaching your idea, but pretty much I'm going to. Absolutely resonate with the sleeping situation. I found that I go through fluctuations through my life of sleeping well, sleeping poorly. Not entirely sure how and why that's happening. I don't know whether it's the fact that there's, work pressures, family pressures, or even maybe too much alcohol sometimes. It could be all three potentially. But I definitely think that habit of removing technology before going to bed, actually for the fact of having better time with my wife and being a bit more present. I think the only area of my life, I say that now, only, that's a bad word to use. One of the areas of my life is to be a bit more present with my wife. And I think technology is a real sort of challenge. And I'd like to manage that better. And I think the benefits would be phenomenal. So I'm probably on that journey. I don't think I've nailed it yet. So sorry if I haven't answered your question completely.
That's fine.
Do you know what this is going to say?
Don't know, you're not allowed to.
No. It's a slight variation of that. And I heard this recently from somebody, I forget exactly where, but talking about the disconnect of work and home life in this sort of modern world we find ourselves living in, and a lot of us working from home. Because I know when we first met over video conference, you were in your home office. Jonny, we spend a lot of time we spend a lot of time. I see you a lot of time in your home office when I'm in mine. And I think it sort of links, I think, to what both of you are saying, which is around the ability to kind of properly disconnect from work. And this thing, I'll call it a thing because I forget whether it was a video or whether it was a conversation from a podcast, but talked about having a trigger for for breaking the chain between those two environments. And I think actually I see a lot of people who are we're blurring those two environments, myself included, of, okay, I'm just going to leave my office, but I'm going to take my laptop with me so I can just finish an email while the kids are eating their dinner. And I'm like, talk about kind of reconnecting with the family and having that sort of isolation. I mean, I used to have an hour and a half on the train to find that time, and now I have 30 seconds between leaving the door and landing in the kitchen. And I think that's really, really important so for me, it's for myself, but also as I see in others, it's having the ability to go, okay, well, let's shut the lid. What's that thing, that trigger that's going to stop it, that's going to disconnect me from work me into family me so that I can properly be present. So I've slightly stolen your points, but I think that thing's particularly important.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got any thoughts
on
that.
I've got a couple of things, and probably even one of the tools actually we talked about at the start to use there, which can help with switching off. But it's linked to something. Starbucks did a study a few years ago. I think it was called the Third Place or Third Space study, as to why the most popular reason they go to their coffee shops. And it was actually that transition from going from work to home. People see it as a way. That's why most people go to a coffee shop on the way. That's why most people will say, let's meet at a coffee shop. Yeah. Not just because of coffee, but it's that kind of break in between. And that's what a lot of people have lost with working from home, is that divide, particularly when you don't have the luxury of a home office. And, I've worked with salespeople that might have, particularly during COVID, who were sort of in a house share, for example, and all sharing a living room, and not having that luxury, and your brain then finds it very difficult to go, hang on, we were working in here today and now we're meant to be chilling out, but I'm starting to have these core memories of, well, I'm here for this reason. So how can I switch off from that? So something that I encourage people to do is what I call the brain dump exercise. So the biggest challenge I find is that people are so busy in their day, they don't have time to reflect on it. And often it's not until we go to bed that we sort of unwind due to technology. And that's when all those thoughts come through. And that can often be the reason why people struggle to sleep. It's a bit like being in a CGI film. You do all this green screen stuff, and then you're like, hang on, I don't really make sense of it until I watch it back at the end.
Yes, yeah.
So the idea behind the brain dump is it's 4 quadrants. You do this at your end of your day, like just before you're finishing, wrapping up, and you can spend 5 minutes on it, 10, 15, and there's 4 quadrants. There's pending, there's wins, challenges, solutions. So pending is you brain dump everything that you think your brain is going to think about for the next day, or if it's a Friday, next week. Even if you've got it in your calendar, go, what is it something is going to pop up? I've got to send this email. I've got to speak to this person. I've got to book a plumber. Like, it doesn't just have to be work related. Get it all down. Wins is, what have I done well today, or even this week if you're doing it at the end of the week, and not just what has happened, because if you say that, you'll often focus on the things you haven't controlled. And then the challenges is, rather than just going, oh, it's been a really stressful day, or I wasn't productive, what made it that? Like, what was the tangible thing? I got caught up in emails. I got called into meetings. I said yes to something that actually took 2 hours longer than I thought it would be. And then solutions, what can I do tomorrow or next week that's going to mitigate that? Actually check how urgent something is, or close my emails down when I'm making calls. So the idea is you're left with this brain dump at the end of the day. The pending psychologically means, and subconsciously, your brain thinks, oh, we're not going to forget it because it's written down. And anyone listening to this with kids will realize, like, when you write something down, when you put it on the fridge, when you give kids timetables, their anxiety reduces. And we're no different as adults. Like, you write it down, it says, hey, we're not going to forget about this, because your brain is then like, well, I need to think about it and I need to keep it top of mind. And then when you do that, your primal brain switches on and goes, we need to solve it right now. So the pending solves that. The wins allows for that self-reflection. Yeah. It's not always obvious. It gives you that immediate sort of gratification in a different way. Yeah. Challenges doesn't just keep you stuck at that level of, it was stressful, it was unproductive. It was, here's what the reasons were. And then solutions are, right, I can go into my evening knowing I'm going to do something about this tomorrow or next week.
And thank you, Chris, because last week I was feeling super overwhelmed, and to a point it got to Friday and I was like, I could do this whole week again. And you know, we work closely, right? I can see when you're overwhelmed and I'm overwhelmed, and I'm sure the same has arisen for you. And I wrote a list down. It was a list this time, not in the quadrants, but I was able to use the trigger, shut the lid, wrote the list, and I remember then I was able to unpack and spend some time with my wife and actually enjoy the weekend and just chisel away at that list on Monday. But I love the quadrants. I think, because I like, most of it's like writing a to-do list, and they always seem to like cross off the top thing, because you're like, yes, I've done one. It's that kind of thing. You just note down the wins and the pending actions. Thank you.
And it reduces the chance of those Sunday scaries from coming. Yeah. Because most people go, I'll plan my week on a Sunday. And I'm always like, how can you become more efficient and not having to use your weekends? We'll do it on Friday, because everything will be fresh in your mind. And you'll also recognize what's worked that week and what hasn't, to allow you to go in. And then you can always look at it when your brain pops up over the weekend going, oh, what about this? And well, let's have a look. Okay, we've got it. It's okay.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I've definitely got much less sophisticated ways that I think I sort of do some of that, like you, Jonny, with to-do lists. I'm a very to-do list type person. It's quite an organised to-do list. But I think just having that, the variety of different things that picks on all of those points, not just activities led, but thinking about how you're feeling and celebrating those successes. We do something around at a dinner table every evening. Your kids aren't always at home for dinner, but that question of, well, what was good in our day? Like, so we ask one another what was good in our day, and it challenges us all to sort of think about something that could have put a smile on your face, as opposed to sitting down at the table going, oh, well, that was a rubbish way to do this, or that was a terrible day, or I had this, or I had that. And it's just, so I love that. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think you owe it to yourself, on a day, if you're spending 8, 10, 12 hours of work, or a week, 70, 80, 90 hours, you owe it to yourself to recognize where that's got you. Imagine if you were building a house for 70 or 80 hours a week and you didn't look at it. Yeah. Or imagine if you were climbing a mountain and you never turn around to actually acknowledge the distance you've come. Yeah. It's like, the point of that is it's not trying to create toxic positivity where you're saying, oh, everything's fine, I'm going to ignore the challenges, they're there already, but these are the things that you don't or aren't always aware of. And it's providing more of a balance, like neutral thinking, rather than trying to create this toxic positivity thinking.
I mean, that's a reason to buy the book, if not that that's what this is about. But like, I'm like, right, I'm on Amazon, I'm going to pre-order this. So I mean, obviously, sales psyche and getting into the kind of psychology of sales success, and you're sharing there just some sort of tools techniques and kind of frameworks. And I'm sure the 37 odd others that are in or 37 that are in the book. If you had to sort of, if we kind of transition to the problem, as it were, like what do you think are the 2 to 3 things related to a salesperson's mindset that could potentially threaten their performance and well-being?
Yeah, I'll headline the 3 and then feel free if you want to pick it, which one. I think self-talk.
Yeah.
I think how you perceive emotions and your comfort zone, or labeling your comfort zone. Those are the 3. Where do you want to start?
I want to go down the middle to start off with. So perceive emotions and describe what that means. Could you give me a context of what that means, or maybe an example? Because then that would, I think, help me unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, for example, when you're feeling stressed, say you get an email come in or a call doesn't go to plan, or you talked about feeling overwhelmed, is how you perceive that feeling. A lot of people can see it as, I'm fighting against this. Oh, why am I feeling stressed again? Why am I feeling so anxious? Why am I feeling nervous about this presentation? Like frustrated by it and, beating yourself up over it, which of course kind of couples with self-talk, but can lead you down that path of sticking there, ruining your day, ruining your week, and to the point of the brain not doing that means you're then just going to focus on all the negative things.
Yeah.
And Deloitte released a study a few years ago where they said we've labelled probably about 25 core emotions, but we've got 15,000 combinations we can feel. So the problem there is you can often be mislabeling emotions as well, and it's very easy to go down the assumption that, this is anxiety, this is stress, and then your habitual brain will go, well, every time we feel like this must be us being anxious, then this must be stress. And the other problem with this is how you perceive emotion. So if you perceive stress as a negative emotion, you'll get more stressed about being stressed. If you perceive it as a positive emotion, you might try and put yourself into more stressful situations because you think, I thrive off stress, I need deadlines, but that can lead to burnout quicker.
Yeah.
An example I use here, either of you like roller coasters?
If I feel strapped in.
Okay, so on the fence.
Well, do you know, I don't like, but I do like, weirdly, like the rickety wooden ones.
Yeah.
I remember in America where you don't feel like you're strapped in and go, and then at the end of it you're like, oh, thank God I finished that. I'm never going on again. Great question.
I can't do those where I feel like I've been in a fight with Anthony Joshua.
Okay.
Well, you'd win.
So I enjoy them. I wouldn't ask you to visualize this too much, but imagine we went on a roller coaster together. We'd both go round. We would both feel the same thing. Like, we wouldn't be able to think straight, probably have sweaty palms, we'd have 1,000 thoughts going on. But our perception of that feeling would be different. I'd see it as, I want to do it again. You'd be like, get me off of this thing. And that's the thing here. There is no such thing as a good or bad emotion. There is only a good or bad perception or reaction or response to an emotion. All emotions are signals. They're like the smoke alarm going off in the house. Not saying the house is on fire yet. It's what we do as a result that can then turn it into an almost self-fulfilling prophecy. When you feel, a question I asked someone on a run the other week was, which is one emotion you wish you could never feel again? They said anxiety. And I said, how would that negatively impact you? Imagine you were never anxious about any presentations. Imagine you were never anxious about what you would say to someone. Imagine you were never anxious about how you planned your day. What could be the impact there? And they were like, well, I might say something I regret, or maybe I wouldn't plan for a presentation. And that's the thing here. When we have perceptions of emotions like that, we lose sight of the benefits of them.
It's really interesting you said. Sorry for butting in. It resonates with I think in this room today, in this place, wherever we are, or if you're listening, we're part of our jobs. The three of us are standing up and delivering some type of insight to professional individuals. I know my worst performance in the last 5 years is where I got myself into a position of feeling like I was absolutely fine at doing what I was doing. I didn't enable, whether it was anxiety or the pressure, I just suppressed it on purpose. I was like, oh, fine, I'll fly in. I've done it for 4.5 years or whatever it was. Turned up the worst delivery I've ever done in my life. And from that moment, I've always said to myself, I've got to allow this, whatever it is, because I'm finding it hard now to label it because there's about 15,000 odd options there. But I've got to allow to just deal with it, because I know when I do enable that thing and I stand up, that's my best delivery. I have to tackle that, although I don't want it there. So that was a good lesson learned. I didn't want it. I didn't allow it to arise. It wasn't very good delivery. Now I just allow it and I have to deal with it.
Well, it's it's even changing. We'll come to self-talk shortly, but even the same way of, for example, being thirsty. Imagine if you didn't know water was the answer to being thirsty. It would be a terrifying experience. You'd be like, hang on, my mouth's getting drier, I'm getting a headache, I feel dizzy, this is quite scary. But we don't have that reaction to thirst. And I'm talking from a first world country here, of course, so I'm not taking for granted that people in the world, but often we don't. We think, okay, well, I'm just going to get some water. We see it as a very clear response. Or the same with hunger as well. But imagine you'd never tell yourself, oh, I hope I never get hungry again, or never get thirsty again, or I never get cold again, or I never get sad again. It's not saying you want these feelings, but you know they're part of being human, and you also know there's a quick solution or something that you can go about doing it. And that's often when we look at other feelings like anxiety, why people can struggle so much, because people aren't educated on how to deal with it effectively. So that's why it can be such a, oh God, what do I do with this feeling? And I still get anxious about things, but now that I change the response to, what are you trying to tell me versus why is this happening to me? Like, what's the signal here?
Okay.
What is it I'm feeling anxious about?
Yeah.
And once you change those to constructive questions and your self-talk, which we can come into, sort of marries in nicely to this, of going, am I speaking to myself in a way I'd want someone else to speak to me, or would I would speak to someone else? If someone else was saying, why are you so anxious about this? Would that make me feel more or less anxious? Probably more. So what's a more constructive thing? What's an empathetic thing if I was sitting down with someone? And one thing I always encourage people to do with their self-talk, or whether it's imposter syndrome, or I work with people around their attachment styles, is give it a name, give it a human name. So treat it like it was a person. I was working with someone recently and they labelled theirs James. So they went to uni with a guy called James. And James was a guy that was incredibly anxious. Every time they suggested something, James would share something, go, oh, what if this goes wrong? What if this happens? And all they did over the years was just sit down with James and listen, and then sort of reassure him. They didn't judge James because they thought, well, James is only going to feel more anxious. Or if we judge them, he's just going to bottle it up and it will come out in other ways. And that's one of the most effective things you can do, is think about, how can I observe my thoughts rather than judge them as much? And when I observe them, I can then listen to them and going, what are you trying to tell me? And now I'm going, I'm anxious that maybe if we take a presentation, for example, public speaking, which most people can relate to, I'm anxious they'll ask a question I don't know the answer to. I'm anxious if it's a pitch, they'll throw out a objection I can't handle. I'm anxious that there'll be people in the room I haven't met yet. Okay, what's one or two things within my control I can do to reduce the chances of that happening? I can preempt that objection. I can plan for that question or ask someone else. I can research those people or ask my contact, like, how do these people best receive information? And then I go into that, and then I'm like, actually, do you know what? If I didn't do that, if I didn't feel like that, I probably wouldn't have preempted that objection. I wouldn't have answered that question. So I leave it going, I'm actually grateful for that feeling. And not in a toxic positivity way again, but in a way of next time it shows up, I'm then like, here you go, here's your signal. What is it trying to tell me?
Yeah, that's helpful.
I think I was going to ask you a question. You know, when you're thinking of a question, when you're in the middle of a conversation, I was going to ask you a question, but how do you practically do that? And I think what you just shared there, Chris, which is that listen to your own thoughts. Because I think so often people, I say we, I think I'm talking for everybody here, but if I think about me, and actually if I think about some of the people that we work with, Jonny, as well, is that we're encouraging them to think about and to translate it into something productive. Right? To your point, we don't want just blind positivity because it doesn't help us in any way, but to turn it into kind of productive self-talk. Well, actually, I think there's a bit in between that you just shared there, which is we've got to listen to it first, so that we can unpick it, so that we can translate it, rather than just saying, I'm going to take that word and directly translate it to this word and then try and convince myself that that's the thing. So I think that's really important. Like, so if I guess if I think about the audience and the people listening to this podcast, if you're out there and you're an individual contributor and you're, in your first 18 months in the sales role and you're thinking, I've got my first like big pitch, what am I going to do? Having that, listening to those thoughts, listening to your own thoughts and your own perhaps destructive self-talk before you kind of jump into turning it around makes it maybe more likely that you'll believe it.
And there's another surprise tool for this that I use called
No way.
notice it, name it, neutralize it.
Notice it, name it, neutralize it.
So notice it, and this is where you want to become more familiar with your triggers, your physiological triggers as well, because you'll start to notice your physiological triggers will be there before your thoughts are. they'll often be your signs. So for example, I started to realize I started tapping my leg or like clenching my fist if I was starting to feel anxious. So I knew that was a sign of, I'm going to start feeling or thinking a certain way. Just bringing that awareness in the same way you might be like, I'm going outside. I might start feeling cold. So I don't need to panic, because if I do, I know I need to put a jumper on. Rather than go, why am I feeling like this? Well, obviously I'm outside with just a t-shirt on, so it's going to be cold. So it's noticing it. It's then noticing it from an observer point of view. Rather than why am I feeling anxious again is, for example, why you call my self-taught Christian. So I'll be like, Christian's having this thought again, or Christian's thinking about this again, in a very neutral way, not in a positive way. Because again, I've got a bit of a problem with positive thinking, because it's almost just trying to convince yourself to think a different way.
Yeah.
And your brain then goes, let's be honest, not everything does end up positively. It then goes, see, told you so. We should have thought negatively.
Yeah.
It's like when someone says, just be confident. Okay, yeah. Or don't worry, or calm down. Anyone listening to this, have you ever said calm down to someone? Has it ever had a benefit? No. It has the opposite effect. And we all regret saying it. Even when you say it in the best intentions, it doesn't help the situation. So notice it, name it. So name those thoughts. And whenever you're doing this exercise, which I would encourage people to do proactively, because any tool you practice proactively, the more likely you're going to use it reactively, and the less likely you'll need it reactively.
True.
But practicing writing it down on paper, because going back to that list example, when we write, we have to use the rational part of our brain. We disrupt that amygdala hijack, which is often where those irrational thoughts and feelings sit, and because it forces us to be present. We can all probably touch type here. If you try and write without looking, it doesn't end well. So you're having to force yourself to focus. So you're writing those thoughts. Christian is thinking this. This is going to go wrong. What if this happens? What if this happens? This is where you get into those negative what ifs. Then the neutralize it part, you can go two ways here. So if you're thinking about a future situation, a presentation, a meeting, a call, anything, even outside of work, it could be meeting the in-laws for the first time, for example, is going two questions. Whatever those thoughts are, what are the biggest 2 or 3 reasons I'm thinking that might happen? So rather than just going, I'm anxious, this is going to go wrong. What are the 2 or 3 biggest reasons? I use that example there of presenting, question, objection. And then what are 1 or 2 things within my control I can do to reduce the chances? Not stop them, because I'm going to be realistic here, but I can reduce them. Okay, here's 1 or 2 actions. And what I've done there, I've given myself some tangible things to focus on. And often that's all we need in a situation, isn't to know that everything's going to be fine, but to know we've got some influence within that control. That will often reduce your anxiety and stress. And going back to overwhelm is often a breakdown of thoughts, not always of life. And it's often where you've been thinking too much about things. When you can actually bring it back to, here's something in the present that I can do, I feel less overwhelmed by it. And that's a byproduct of a list. So that's the neutralized part. There's another one which I can go into, which is where maybe you're overthinking a conversation you've had with a manager, or you're thinking, that email was a bit short, they're annoyed with me. Or, hang on, that person hasn't texted me back yet, I've done something wrong. And this is where you want to imagine your brain is like a courtroom. You've got the prosecution throwing out all those accusations. They don't respect you, they think this of you. You might have people folding their arms sitting there, when you're presenting, or afterwards thinking they didn't ask many questions, maybe they didn't enjoy it. So then you want to go defense in the courtroom. Where is the evidence that thought is true or false? What else could be true in this situation? And if I knew that other thought were true, how would I think or feel differently about this?
When you said the replying to a text, just takes me back to being at uni and going, they'll probably just run out of credit.
Yeah.
What, with the 10p per text message? And
it's a lot more when I was at uni.
Was it?
Amazing. Oh dear. That's I think that's really, really important to think. And a lot of this, I'm thinking, in terms of its application, Chris, obviously it's not just in sales, and a lot of this can relate to, I'm sure people listening to this are recalling perhaps a meeting that didn't go quite as they'd planned, and they're thinking, maybe if I take that same courtroom approach, that might help me sort of reflect on it. But also in any kind of job, in life in general, right? This is super helpful way of handling some of these challenges.
And there was a third, wasn't there? You said comfort zoning was the third. Is that right? What's the?
Well, I think the problem I have with the comfort zone is how it's labelled. Is if it was so comfortable, why is everyone trying to leave it? You know, if this was a nice thing, why are so many people talking about leaving it all the time? If you said, I'm in this relationship, but I really want to get out of it, it's like, well, sounds a bit toxic to me. Like, it doesn't sound like a good relationship if everyone's telling you to leave it. And I think there's a few problems that come from the comfort zone. Is you then perceive everything outside of it is going to be uncomfortable. Going back to labeling, our brains are very black and white in their thinking. Is, you know, if I think that I don't feel motivated today, I can assume I'm unmotivated, or I don't feel happy, I can assume I'm sad. And of course, there's a lot of grey in between. But when you have a perception that things are going to be uncomfortable, either A, you'll procrastinate on doing it, B, you won't do it, or C, you go into it with a negative headspace and can create a self-fulfilling prophecy, almost being like, well, I told you so. You know, I told myself so that I wasn't going to be good at that, or it wasn't going to be good. And it's then also when you do start going outside of it, you then start going, oh, this is a nice, comfortable thing I can go back to. So it seems a bit easier to kind of revert back to and maybe not push through and build that resilience as well. So my sort of perspective on this is it's more of a familiar zone rather than a comfort zone. Is that you don't become more comfortable with something, you become more familiar with it. Like a marathon runner doesn't become more comfortable with hitting that wall, they become more familiar with the feeling behind it. That person going to the gym doesn't become more comfortable with lifting weights, they become more familiar with how to do it and familiar with the feelings afterwards. If you think about anything you do, you don't become more comfortable with it, you become more familiar with it. And the idea behind that is you then start looking at everything outside of what you're familiar with is not uncomfortable but unfamiliar, which straight away doesn't say to your brain, this is going to be scary, this is going to be painful, this is going to be something, it's just unfamiliar. And being unfamiliar with something can breed curiosity. And go, actually, I'm curious to become more familiar with this. And the more familiar I become with something, ironically, I then become more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But looking at it that way, just that labeling in your brain allows you to kind of go in with more curiosity rather than sort of thinking, oh God, this is going to be tense. I'm going to struggle here.
And it promotes the idea of habits again, right? You know, to get from familiar to unfamiliar, then to get to the familiar again, then you're going to have to form some type of productive habit, or maybe unproductive, but you're going to get familiar to a point, right? So that's going to take habits. I like that. I like the challenge, because the way that I've seen comfort zones articulated before is comfort zone, stretch zone, and panic zone. And then you overlay this sort of classic, you know, if we said let's all go for a 5K, well, you'll be fine, Chris, because you've got a running club. But then if I said let's do maybe not half marathon, let's do 6K,
ultra marathon.
That's stretch zone, and then panic zone is
zone.
the half marathon, right? It's the not for you, but you'll be absolutely fine. But yeah, that's how I've heard it. But I really like the flip on that and the language, and it goes back to that how words create pictures and feelings in your head. So, you know, the spin on using familiar and unfamiliar, when you think about that, how that prompted curiosity, but how that changes your emotions inside you.
Yeah.
A lot how words are so powerful, aren't they? That's what I'm hearing from you today.
Yeah. And even coupling that with, we touched on self-talk a little bit, but you mentioned earlier on, like something I have to get better with, that feeling is even just being conscious of one of the simplest things that I encourage people to think about is even those little words like should, have, need. When you think about it, everyone could probably relate to this, listening to this. You've been in a job, relationship, friendship, somewhere where you've had someone micromanaging you, going, you need to do more of this, you should do this, you have to do this. And we hate it. Yeah. We hate demands, but we put it on ourselves every day. I should work out more. I have to eat healthier. I need to do this. And that's what a lot of people do, particularly for New Year's resolutions, which is why it fails. You tell yourself this so much, you then end up self-sabotaging. Because your brain goes, well, you're an adult, I do what I want. Or it's then like, you know, well, I need to, that judgment when you don't. So even just changing it to I want to or get to. Like, I want to work on this. I don't need to, I want to, because
Choice.
I get to go for a run today. I want to become more mindful of how I eat. I want to become more conscious of how much I exercise. I want to become more familiar with this feeling I get before public speaking.
That's just so helpful. And as we move away from that topic, there's been a great conversation we've had in the past with you as we've explored sort of growth and leadership, how important that is to businesses, right? We speak to a lot of our guests about, you know, leadership and the importance, and actually how if leadership isn't thriving or optimized, it can actually be the demise of an organization. But you know, the question that we've spoken about in the past is that when talking about growth, we sort of see leaders often focus on motivation, you know, as you sort of say, right, come on guys, let's get going. But from our conversation before, Chris, you've got a different slant on that. You've got a different view about leaders and motivation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love you to share that to the guests.
Yeah, I think there's two or three things. I think first of all, it's addressing there's kind of three big myths I see around motivation. The first is that you should be able to get to this point where you're constantly motivated, which I don't think is healthy or actually possible. Because this idea that this is often driven by your perception of other people online or offline, or seeing people around you being successful and thinking, God, they're so constantly motivated. And even you'll hear people who you might perceive like this saying they're not, these people don't rely on motivation. They rely on often habits, but they rely on creating motivation through action. And this perception of thinking I should always be motivated is a downfall for people, because when you're not, you judge yourself. When you are, you then wonder where it's gone. You're like, hang on, I was super motivated last week. I was super motivated before I went to bed last night. Why have I woken up and felt like this? Which often, ironically, takes you more away from motivation because you feel demotivated as a result of it. So the perception in itself, it's the same with happiness, I think, is people see it as a destination, whereas actually it can come in waves. And Simon Sinek talks about this surfer mentality in a different context, and I kind of use it in a different way, in that, some days you're riding a wave, some days you're under one, but wherever you are, you're not stuck there. And like every good surfer knows, no matter how good the wave is, it's coming down at some point. Not in a negative way, but in I want to prepare myself for this so I can catch the next wave. And that's the thing as well with motivation. You're going to have those waves.
Oh, so interesting.
When you come down from it, don't judge yourself, because the more you do that, the longer you stay underwater. Focus on, what did I do to get there in the first place? What was I thinking, feeling, and doing? What's in my control right now to catch the next one? But don't then think, I just need to wait for motivation. Because the second thing, and I'll pause there actually beforehand.
Well, no, but I think it's great, and what you share. I mean, we do a lot of sharing back to the guests, and I'm going to tell you a secret. It's a bit of and I like this because it's important to be quite human. Is that when growing up, when I was in my teenage years, like I think us all, if I may say, that we did things that weren't particularly that good, right? That embarrassing, or we shouldn't have done that, and we got told off. And I remember, I can't name the exact situation, but to that point about the surfing analogy, I used to see it as a newspaper, and I think because of my expressive nature, I'd always want to be at the front of the newspaper. Hey, look at me! Hey, look at me! That's why we're doing a podcast. That's video, right? but that definitely was the way I used to look at things in my head. Maybe not aligned to the motivation, but the way I used to see it was that I always want to get to the front. But actually, I'd probably sit in the middle most of the time. That's fine. I'm not seen. I'm not seen. But when things are getting really shit, I'm at the back, but that's fine because I know where I am. I've just then got to put myself with some actions to go forward and learn how to get back forward. Surfing, maybe not the same, but you sort of see how that compartmentalize and think about moving forward. It just resonated with me when you were describing that.
Yeah, and it's just making peace with it and understanding that it's okay not to be motivated all the time. The more you beat yourself up about it, that's going to make you move further away. The second thing to focus on, which I think is a myth, a lot of people think, I need to be motivated to take action. I don't feel motivated to make calls today. I don't feel motivated to do this home admin task, whatever it might be, or paint the walls or something.
Yeah.
I don't feel motivated. And I always ask people, like, if you go for a workout, if you go to the gym, if you go for a run, like, how do you feel afterwards? Like, how do you feel after you go for your walk, you say in the morning without your phone?
I know how I feel, how much better. My wife remarkably says, I can tell you've done some exercise this week and you have been, because you're basically a nicer person.
Yeah. So the answer there is you feel really good at the end of it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is motivation comes from action. A lot of people perceive I need motivation to act, but action can spark motivation. And the realization of that is it puts you more in control of your own motivation. Okay, hang on, this is something I can influence. I'm not at the mercy of. If I didn't wake up today motivated, that's okay, because I've been asleep for 8 hours. Like, yes, I can wake up some days, and but some days I can't, and that's all right. But it's then going, what can I do to spark motivation? Rather than I don't feel motivated, is what can I do right now? I could go for a walk. I could put on a playlist. I could speak to someone I know is going to get me into a good headspace.
And thinking about that, it's helpful from a sort of self-service perspective. If you were a leader listening to this in a growth environment, what are some of the things that you could do to encourage your people, not to say motivated, but to manage this situation? Like, what would you suggest?
Well, I think the other thing here is that leaders should focus less on how do I motivate my team and more how do I inspire them.
Okay.
So, it's physically impossible to motivate someone else. It's not, because the idea as well, the problems that come from that is you can make people overly dependent on you. They can then start thinking, I need this manager to be in the office for me to motivate.
Look at the
feel
Football
motivated.
League, Premier League, yeah.
Yeah, I
happen,
need them. And then if you're on holiday or the team gets bigger, they have less time with you. Then they start going, oh, you've because they rely on you so much, they start sort of criticising you more, going, well, why didn't you have as much time for me? As well, the team's gone from 5 to 20. And when they leave, they'll then realise, oh, actually, like, hang on, I haven't built any tools here at all. So I think the biggest thing that a manager can help with this is, first of all, better understanding what your team's aspirations are.
Okay.
So we talk a lot about motivation, but inspiration and aspiration often get overlooked. It's like, what are you trying to build towards? And the analogy I often use here, if you're going past a building site, we all get curious, don't we, what they're building. This person's walking past one day and he asks the first person he sees, and I'm laying bricks. And he goes, well, don't know what that really means. Next person, building a wall. Okay, don't really understand. Goes along, site manager's there. What are you building? They say, we're building a hospital. Now, I often ask people, what's the most important thing there? And it's a bit of a trick question because they all are, but it's quite an interesting question to ask people, because some people go the bricks, some people go to hospital. Well, hang on, if you're focusing on the hospital, who's going to build it? Focusing on the bricks, which way are you going? If you're not focusing on the walls, that's a big gap in between. And what you want to look at is, do you understand your team's hospital, their own individual one, and encouraging them not just to have one, because you don't want them to put all their identity. What are they trying to build towards? Have you helped them identify their walls along the way? Because laying a brick and building a hospital are two big things apart. And then have you helped them understand what the habits would be, the bricks, each day, to be able to get there? Because then once you understand someone's hospital, you then know what inspiring them, or how to inspire them, and you know what kind of conversations to have with them, going, you said you wanted to work towards this, like, what have you done this week around that? Or what can I do to support you here? Or when they're maybe feeling a bit off, is going, what's changed? Is this something you still want to achieve?
Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, and it talks right to what good leadership. If I think about what good leadership is coaching, is helping someone like you said, the inspiration, asking questions to drive that thought, and understanding what it is that somebody needs, rather than saying, okay, well, yeah, I need to motivate you, so I'm gonna carry you, to your point, because then when you've got your hands full of everybody and you need to put some people down, they feel dropped. Versus being able to say, actually, I need to help. I'm sort of right behind you, just giving you nudges, just reminding you of the important things that are going to help you get to that hospital.
Yeah, exactly. It's going, and some leaders struggle with this because they then think, hang on, this is where their own self-talk comes in. Are they going to think less of me if I'm not giving them an answer? Are they going to think I'm not giving them a support? Am I going to look like I'm not leading if I'm not doing for people? Or
am I going to frustrate them by not giving them an answer?
Yeah.
I think a lot of leaders think by asking great coaching questions and coaching someone in that way, and really helping inspire them, as you say, that you're just sort of taking the easy road and not answering a question, so you're actually frustrating the person who's just asking for support.
Yeah. I think there is, again, it's sometimes people go into this black or white thinking, I either need to ask really great questions or I need to give them everything. And it's at the start almost imagining like stabilizers, is going, how can I do a bit of both? How can I ask a question? And if I see someone who's getting a bit frustrated or stressed, I can give them a hint. And then I can say, and what else do you think? So I might say, ask them a question, how would you go about this? You said you wanted to achieve this. What would that look like for your week? Maybe this. Okay. And here's something that worked for me. Based on that, what else do you think could work for you? And what else? And what else?
Yeah.
And just kind of balancing the two, rather than thinking, I have to go down this route, because that's what some people struggle with. They go, I have to be a coach, and then your team's getting really frustrated, and you either abandon that and think, well, I'm not going to try that again, or you stick at it, and then you just frustrate people in your team, so they never come to you for any questions because they just think, oh, he's just going to reverse it back to me all the time.
Yeah. You're never going to get a straight answer.
Yeah.
You might as well figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's, again, really powerful, important point there around, and you think about that kind of key takeaway there of not trying to motivate, but trying to inspire, I think might help a lot of leaders in changing their kind of mindset or approach to that.
Yeah, and Chris, I'm interested because a lot what you talk about, a lot what you author, a lot what you support your clients with is like the turbocharged version of, we do 3 parts to our work at SBR. Systems, so what are your processes in your organization to enable your sales leadership, marketing leadership, sales effectiveness and marketing effectiveness at work. We talk a lot about the skills. Naturally, we've got to be quite skillful as professionals, and we also talk about the mindset as well, so motivation. You talk a lot about unproductive thinking patterns at the moment, which are really black and white thinking. You've talked about some others today. I'm really curious if we had a panel of CROs in front of us, right? How do you think they index those three things: skills, processes, systems, and motivations, to be the thing that's going to drive growth? Do you what's their perception at the moment of when you're talking to CROs? Is it do they downplay the motivation? That's what I'm probably biasing here a little bit. Or where do you think they think about things at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very easy, again, to look at the tangible thing that's in front of us, the skill. We need to give them more product training. We need to give them more objection handling training. It's like, well, hang on, have you talked about the objections in their own head? Like the self-talk.
What's those blockers?
Yeah, exactly.
Great one.
It's kind of, we need to give them time management. What about how they manage their energy? Like I kind of address this in the book, is like there's so much of the foundation underneath that this is built on, is you can give, in sales, in any environment, we're looking at technology, we're giving people more access to tools, and the biggest tool you have is your mind. And if you're not taking care of it, then you're not going to be, someone isn't going to be able to fully sort of equip themselves or able to take full sort of ownership of the skill set side of things, or the system side of things as well, because they've got their own self-talk and challenges going on around it. So I definitely think it is something that I wouldn't say like a universal blanket approach. There are certainly more people now recognizing the value of it, but there's that almost balance sometimes of thinking, it's more of a tick box exercise sometimes, of we just need to do this to make them feel good. And it's like, okay, you might make them feel good in the moment, but then they're going to go back and you're almost doing more harm than good, because they're like, we know why you did that.
Yeah, well, I'm a massive advocate of it. I know that some of your clients that we know of as well, I've spoken to them, they rave about you. They think you're phenomenal, and clearly you are, because you've got a great business. I just think about the impact of well-being, and I work with a financial well-being organisation, and I was like, why on earth is financial well-being not one of the biggest things that's spoken about in school? It's just bonkers. Let alone actually well-being as a whole. So I think in business, if we can start to bring in some of these ideas, I think it would just be great for us, not only at work but also outside of work. I think that's the impact, isn't it? You can take these techniques out. So yeah.
I mean, I've as we've been talking today, Chris, I've probably related more of what you've talked about to outside of work type situations in my own life, and I think you think about and shamefully sometimes with my kids, I'm like, you the three words we shouldn't say, and I was like, yeah, definitely used all of those about 1,000 times a day. Hiding, just hide, because and I think that's so it's so important. As I said before, it's not just about what we do in here, but I think or what we do in our jobs, but I think also as a real lever for success. And I'm thinking about tying this right the way back from, because I know with the Run Club, it's about providing that space to help your mental well-being, and how exercise is such a great, not just exercise. I know you talk more about there's other reasons why that works in running specifically, but also just the impact that your health and how you look after your body, and how that impacts the way you can look after your mind, and how it's all tied together. And I think it's great that we're getting more, that this is a more sort of recognized conversation to be having, I think. And I think the more it gets into businesses, and more it gets into that kind of psyche. And I'm not suggesting that all businesses should start kind of run clubs and put gyms in the basement and everything else, but actually there's something to be said for people in your teams feeling like they've got the opportunity to go, I just need to get outside for a bit. I just need to step away from my desk and go and do this. I've got 100 calls to do today. I can't just sit here and back to back those. Otherwise I'm just going to be completely shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of ties into psychological safety, is knowing that I'm not, as a company, you're not saying that people can turn up as not their best selves every day, and but that you're telling them when they do, they will feel safe to be able to talk about it, and they'll feel understood, and they'll feel like supported. That's the kind of key difference here. Around that, and going that I do have that space to go out from my desk, and I feel like I'm not going to get judged, or other people are going to be like, oh, you're weak, or this person always needs to go outside. It's normalized, it's actually like celebrated, and oh, it's good that you got out, like, rather than why do you keep leaving the office, like why aren't you back at your desk?
So in a previous job, we used to have a Friday lunch run club, and we'd always kind of go out for a and I think it was helped by the fact that, obviously this was pre-COVID when we were all in the office, but it's helped by the fact that there was a group of us. So it was almost like, hang on, that you talk about normalizing it, all of a sudden that gives other people who maybe didn't feel like they had that freedom. And, you know, at the time it was a group of senior people in the business who were doing that, right? Like we were the leadership team essentially. So again, you then people who are looking around going, you know, they've just gone out for like 50, I was going to say 50-minute 10K, it's probably more like 55. But yeah, you know, you got out for like an hour. 10K.
It's gone up a bit.
Yeah, it is. It keeps climbing. But you know, they've gone out and they've taken that time, and they've come back and they've had the lunch, and they're not apologising for doing that. I think that's so important.
And that psychological safety piece, it's something that when we do a lot with growth officers and, you know, learning and development professionals or CPOs, and you always hear like the growth officer's got a target on their back, and the important part around that is that I think that push is just pushing them so hard, and I wonder what's that self-talk, as you were talking about, in their own head, which means it's translating to their individual contributors and their other leadership members. But then the CPOs there, well, we've got to remember about psychological safety. And then the CGO or CROs go, no, don't worry about it. We've just got to get going. So I think there's a bit of friction that goes on in businesses about psychological safety. Have you seen that before?
Yeah. And I think, again, it's down to no one's fault, but a lack of education, understanding of the value that comes from it. First and foremost for the individual, and, you know, how they'll benefit from it, that will then subsequently benefit the business as a result.
Yeah.
You know, it's like going, if you treat the person as the person, that they'll then, you know, it's a bit like when say trust the process. It's like, well, trust the person, take care of the person, they'll take care of the process, and the process will work. So if you're saying one thing as a business, trust the process, follow our sales process, well, give people that space to feel supported within it, and then they'll trust the process. It needs to work both ways. And some companies don't. They say, well, trust the process, but we don't care about that kind of safety side of things. It's the process.
We're going to hammer you for forecast accuracy because now we can see it because we've got a new process for you. Oh yeah, and no thanks, Mr. Boss, Mrs. Boss, I'm not going to do that.
But I think one thing, like, because I'm always conscious with podcasts about what's this tangibly mean, and I think one thing that leaders and I see people struggle with sometimes is they see vulnerability and accountability on opposing scales. And like, well, if the more vulnerable I am, or the more like we give people that freedom, the less accountable they're going to be. And that, again, that can be black and white thinking in play. It's not always the case. And I think the best thing about vulnerability is it builds relatability. And vulnerability doesn't always have to be, oh, you know, I'm really struggling today and this is what's going on. It can be coupled with, guys, do you know what, actually, I'm having a bit of I spoke to this, was a senior leader, and he had a group of people on a Zoom, about 70 or 80 people, CRO, and, you know, how is everyone? Murmurings. He goes, guys, I'm having a really stressful day, but do you know what? I'm going to go out for a run at lunch, and this is going to like really help me. I'm going to leave my phone in the office, and I'm going to go for a run. And the key one there, everyone else after was like, do you know what? Me too. Like, you know, it didn't say, oh, everyone can just have the day off. But that's the thing. When you're being vulnerable, if you can give people an idea of here's how I can deal with it at the same time, or not saying here's an instant solution, but here's something I'm going to try, then you give people that space and freedom to feel like, actually, I'm allowed to feel like this as well. Not in the way of I can just go and moan about it or vent about it all week, but something like that is still constructive to talk through, but talking through it in a way of just getting it out there and then finding something. And I think some leaders then go, I can't be vulnerable, I can't be like this. It's going, well, think about your stories, you know, think about, I often say, like, your superhero origin story. Like, because some people might see you as this leader who is like, oh my God, they're so confident, they're so calm. It's like, you weren't like that all the time. Tell people hey, look, I used to struggle with this, and this is how I dealt with it. And this kind of links into resilience, because I think one of the things that people misunderstand resilience is that it's not just about you, it's about other people. You could be the most resilient person, and we'll take an example here. Let's say a business has had 40 people, they've cut 50% of their staff, they've got 20 now. Let's say 10 people have been there for a while. They think, I can handle this, I'm resilient, I'm fine. 10 people aren't. Those 10 people that aren't see the people that are fine and go, they're fine, why am I not? Is something wrong with me? They then start thinking negatively and worrying, and then you've got 50% of your business that is creating this culture here that is then going to start impacting the other 50% who were fine in the first place, are now in an environment that isn't the most healthy, and maybe go, I don't want to be in this environment, I'm going to leave. So it's important to realise how much that kind of collective resilience is important.
Yeah.
As well, when you look at it in sport, you look at it in what's going on in the world right now, that kind of collective resilience is what really gets people together. So yes, you want to take care of yourself, and I don't like this put your own oxygen mask on first, because again, it's a very reactive thing. That only happens often when the plane's going down. It's like, well, how do you do it? How can you take care of yourself before the plane's going down, is what I often say. But then also think about the collective. So if you are a leader or a senior person in a team and you deal with things really well, don't forget to share with people around you of how you've got to that position. Yeah. And here's what I used to struggle. Here's how I used to react, and here's what I did to get there, and here's how I see it now.
This has been one of the most thought-provoking conversations I've had for a long, long while. So thank you. And,
you're welcome.
And the tangible takeaways that, as I say back, we resonate with these sort of things, and not only because of a business, because we do similar things and we come from the same, backgrounds in that respect. Sports coaching was my background, from sort of learning these models. It just resonates. But actually, I think sometimes I haven't given enough thought or time to put into practice. So I think your book, with all of those frameworks, will be those things where I'm going to go on the Christmas list, please, and then actually just take some time. The 4-box model rather than a list. Overwhelming happens an awful lot in my year. You were saying recently about you get towards the end of the year and the fumes are
the annual Christmas burnout.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Jonny. And I think actually having those really practical things, Chris, for people to sort of take away and put into practice. And I think something we've heard over the last few guests that we've had on the podcast is around. I think patience and pace is so important with all of this, right? We can't fix this. Well, there's no fixing anything anyway, but we can't enact all of this stuff overnight. It's a journey that we've got to go on. And for leaders thinking about their teams and for individuals thinking about themselves, we've got to think about it that way, right?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a balance here. I think it's being patient, but still taking action within patience. So some people will say sometimes when I talk about things, easier said than done. That's the biggest limiting belief you can tell yourself, because as soon as you say it's easier said than done, you won't do it. No, exactly. Everything is easier said than done. But being patient with something, giving yourself that compassion to go, look, the tools I talked about today, and I talk about this in the book, don't expect to master them straight away. It's okay. Some days you might forget to do the brain dump. Some days you might find it really frustrating, and that's okay. Or the other tools like notice, name, neutralize. But that's the point, is use them before you need them. Like you drink water before you're dehydrated. You eat before you're absolutely starving. Like do the same thing with these kind of tools. Be patient with them, but also then try and practice that habitual practice proactively and go, yes, I want to give myself time, but I still want to be intentional with this to allow it to resonate.
So intentional. Yeah. That's I think intentional kind of sums up a lot of what we've talked about today. So as Jonny said, it's been incredibly insightful. I'm certain our guests will have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as much as Jonny and I have. So thank you so much for coming on the Growth Workshop podcast, and all the very best with the book. I'm sure it's going to be a massive success based on what we've heard today, and I very much look forward to reading it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.